with Adam R. Welcome to 3P&R. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me for this episode is Detective Jason White. Jason, how you doing, sir?
I'm good, Adam. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Let's open up with this. Let's start with introducing yourself. Let people know who you are, where you came from, and what got you to the path of being a homicide detective.
Well, my name is Jason White. I am a homicide detective with the Tulsa Police Department. And first and foremost, Adam, I appreciate you having me on your show. I'm excited about having this opportunity. As far as how I became a homicide detective, my story is probably a little different than most of the other homicide detectives, I would say. When I was a younger kid, we lived relatively close to the Sharon Tate house from the Manson murders. And basically, I kind of got exposed to that murder or the Manson murders at a young age when the book Helter Skelter came out. And then, of course, when we lived in Los Angeles, the Hillside Stranglers were running around, and that was really my first exposure to homicide. And of course, I was a little kid. I know that sounds strange, but just hearing my parents talk about it and so forth. And my dad was a highway patrolman in California. So I know I'd heard one of your other homicide guests talk about how he grew up watching Chips and stuff like that. Well, my dad actually was a Chip. Huh. So that was kind of neat. And I also remember growing up and watching some of the shows like Dragnet, Chips, and really Quincy. That was kind of the show that kind of attracted me to death investigations.
It's a good thing, right? It's I learn more and more from homicide detectives. It's of you, right? It's part of your DNA. It's what you want to do, and that's what separates a lot of detectives from some do it for the lure of how attractive the subjects can be. Others do it because it's just of them. So in your experience so far, how long have you been doing homicide now?
I've been in homicide for about 13 and a half years. Just recently, I ended up having my 103rd case that I was the lead on, and I've assisted on probably over 600. I've been a police officer on the police department for going on about 24 and a half years. So a little bit over half of my career has been served in homicide.
So that's I commend you for that. It's a lot to take in, especially when you're bringing it home sometimes, because work sits in the back of the mind. You're constantly thinking about what it was that you're dealing with, what's next on the case. Not to mention, I imagine it has a profound effect on how you view the security of your own family. Is that about right?
Well, I think that with any job within law enforcement, you're probably going to have a little bit extra of a heightened awareness. I can tell you that to kind of continue on a little bit, I kind of stopped talking about how I ended up here. As a kid, I was really attracted to it. It was something that I can remember saying to myself at about age 6 that I was like, I think I want to be a homicide detective one day. And then, of course, you grow up and then paths go different ways. And in my case, actually, the last semester of my senior year, I actually became an emergency medical tech. And so from there, I couldn't get a job on an ambulance service. So the one job that I was able to get was I started out in the burn center in Oklahoma City. And it was the 4th largest burn center in the country. And so my job, I was really lucky that they gave me a chance. And my job is that if you were burned, you would likely meet me. And my job was to remove all of the burn tissue, not to get too graphic, but that's what I did. And then from there, I ended up joining in a class that basically taught how to become a surgical tech, or a scrub tech, as they're often referred to. And that's the guys in surgery that slap the instruments in the surgeon's hands or actually assist with the surgeries. And then as I worked in surgery and such, basically there were some other things that happened just kind of in life and things that really got me back in line with wanting to accomplish, becoming a cop and then ultimately to become a homicide detective. And a few of those major things were the O.J. Simpson case, of course, that was on TV in 1994. I think that's when that murder happened, when those murders happened. And really, aside from the Manson murders, I think that was probably the O.J. Simpson replaced that murder as far as probably being one of the more world-renowned type homicides of the time. And so I was kind of gravitated to that. And then of course, Waco. And then ultimately, I lived in Oklahoma City at the time when the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And because of that, I remember that day. And I remember hearing the blast, as did everybody else that lived in that city and was awake. And so those things, just kind of a totality of all of those different circumstances that just really kind of led me to the point where I was like, I had been in the medical field for several years at this point, but I was like, I'm gonna go out there and I'm actually going to try to accomplish my goal, knowing full well that may never happen. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. And to say something, you'd said something about kind of it's in your DNA. I think for the most part it is. I think that, you have those that join the homicide unit that are lucky enough to actually get in there. Once you get all the politics aside and just kind of work your way up there, hopefully it's one of those scenarios where you actually get a chance to work there if you're a hard worker and such. And I did. And so that's how I ended up there. And I'm glad to, even when I got on the police department, I really wasn't interested in anything else other than I wanted to work homicide. But I did take advantage of all the various assignments and such that I had along the way, which included narcotics, crime scene, school resource officer, different jobs. But and ultimately it led me, fortunately, like I said, I was able to get into homicide, but it took me 3 attempts to finally get there.
A lot of the work you've done, burn unit, homicide, all these things require a strong constitution. This is not lighthearted work, right? You have to be able to face some pretty morbid reality in order to deal with it. So in your day, I know there's a certain satisfaction in capturing a killer, taking them off the streets. But that being said, with needing a strong constitution, is it tough for you on a day-to-day basis? Are there like routines you must go to prepare for it?
Well, somebody just asked me this question recently on social media as to, you've been doing this a long time. Does it ever affect you? And I'll tell you that, I've been dealing with death and injuries to the human body, most of which have been just horrific. And I've been dealing with that kind of stuff since I was really 18. So actually, one of the things that I kind of remember when I became a police officer was I was kind of bored to an extent. And it was almost as if, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but it was almost as if I had like withdraw from, I worked in surgery and I worked in open heart surgery. So there was just a tremendous amount of blood. And I worked in basically, if you work open hearts, you basically do all of the surgery. You're kind of the scrub tech that can do anything. So we did a lot of trauma stuff as well. So it was almost as if I almost had withdrawals from not having all of the blood and just seeing the different injuries and stuff to bodies and et cetera. It may not be easy for somebody to quite understand. But then when I got to the police department, it was like, I really noticed, I was like, where's all the excitement? I thought that this was going to be just a lot more craziness and crime scenes and whatever. And I was like, man, there's a lot of boring stuff that we have to do here, including paperwork. And I do remember having kind of that moment where I was a little bit, I just kind of missed the adrenaline rush that I would get in surgery that I didn't necessarily get in the police world.
You know what it is? You know what it is, Jason? I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm understanding you a little better. So for people that don't understand, a scrub tech or a surge tech is someone that they hand instruments to and from a surgeon, which is, it's not as easy as it sounds. You have to memorize a lot of instruments. That surgeon, yes, he relies on you as his right hand, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He can't take his eyes off. Yeah, he can't take his eyes off the case. He has to be hyper focused on it, and you have to know every instrument to the letter. Right, there cannot be the most minor mistake made as a surge tech or a scrub tech. It's very important.
No. Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. I started out in eyes, ears, nose, throat, plastics, and neuro, and that's a lot of words in a mouth right there.
Right.
But I really specialized in reconstructive burns, brains, and backs as far as being a scrub tech at that one hospital. And then I went from there, and really to make any money in the medical field, you have to go from one hospital to the next. And that's where you really make money, because now you have X amount of years of experience and they're willing to pay you more. So from there, I ended up starting out on an open heart surgery team. And I'd had some minor experience as far as at the hospital I was at originally. We did some heart transplants, some of the first heart transplants in the state of Oklahoma, actually. And so, I got exposed to some of that. Well, I remember going over to an open heart team, and I remember telling them at that point, I said, hey, listen, you need to let that surgeon know, who happened to have a reputation of being one of those that would throw an instrument from time to time and yell and scream and everything else.
Yeah.
And I said, you need to make sure that you tell that guy that that I don't know what I'm doing, and to be patient. And of course, they never did tell him that. And so they put me in there on one of my first heart surgeries, and you got hundreds of instruments that are up there, and him going, come on, let's go, all this stuff, and what's taking so long? And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, they never told this guy that I don't know what I'm doing. And so the point to the story is that what I ended up doing is I ended up getting I would get sterile markers. We actually had markers that were in a sterile packaging, and I would literally write down the surgery in order, as when I have a moment to just write something down. And then after the surgery, I would take a photo of that, and then I would memorize it. And I literally memorize. I probably could still walk you through a heart surgery to this day. I never really wanted the surgeon to even speak. And sometimes they would stick their hands out, and they'd be like, the instrument would be in their hand before they even knew what in the heck they needed. And they would be like, stop doing that. And then they'd look at their hand and they're like, oh yeah, you're right. So, but it was an exceptional experience for me, as far as just literally being able to handle stressful situations. And I think that's paid real dividends for me in the police field, et cetera. But,
well, I can tell you why. I just, in everything I hear from you, So again, real quick, I worked in radiology for a number of years, and I recall the scrub techs. They're seeing their stations when we'd go into interventional radiology, because there was many times where you would use like a fluoro radiology. It's a interventional radiologist, they would call them, and then a surgeon would assist. So those instruments, what Jason's describing is there's a table with legitimately hundreds of small pieces of instruments that you have to memorize by number and in order. It's not easy, right? So
no, it's not. And then you have to count all those instruments before and towards the end of the surgery to make sure that you don't leave something in there.
Right.
And not to mention all the needles that from the sutures. I mean, you're liable to have 200 needles that you have to count while you're closing. In addition, you know what I mean? So it's a lot.
Not to mention,
a lot to it.
There's retractors that vary in size. I think people have this idea that retractors are these large things that hold the body up, and there's retractors of many sizes. Sizes.
For sure.
And so that being said, everything I hear about you and why you were bored in standard police work and what pushed you in the direction of homicide is you like critical thinking. That's your forte. It's what stimulates your brain. It's what makes you problem solving. You have critical thinking as part of your makeup. That is your DNA.
Well, I would say that it's definitely a component that you have to have. I mean, I'll tell you right now that, we have 10 detectives in our unit. And for the most part, I would say that the thing that all of us share that is a common denominator amongst all of us is that we're all good at talking to people. And really listening to people, because sometimes that's even more important. But basically, we're all really good communicators, and then we also bring things that are unique to the table. And for me, I would say that probably one of my strong suits, aside from being able to talk to people, is just really being able to interpret crime scenes and just really studying those scenes. And I worked crime scene for about a year and a half beforehand, and that really helped as well. Most detectives that come into homicide don't actually come in through crime scene. That's an unusual path. Most of them literally get in there. They start off in some other detective spot like burglary, and then they graduate up to maybe robbery, and then ultimately get to to homicide. So I came kind of an unorthodox way, but I would agree that I think that all of us, to an extent, have some critical thinking. The way I like to put it is it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and you don't need all pieces to the puzzle to know what's up. So therefore, if you were to visualize like a dollar bill that was cut into puzzle pieces, you're going to know it's a dollar bill if you see half the pieces.
Right.
So, and that's really similar to how we approach these homicides, is just really kind of trying to get as many of those puzzle pieces as you can to get you to the next step to where you're continually moving forward. Yeah.
And so for you to like, I don't know, if you were working the beat, because working the beat, it's, you're not exactly solving a crime. You're just maintaining the balance, right? And I could see how you would get bored. When you go from a surge tech where you're memorizing this and you're basically assisting surgeons to be the other part of their brain, and you're constantly having to think, and it's everything about it is critical, right? And then you go to a very standard position of work where you're not challenged anymore, and you feel like you're not using your potential. And then you get into homicide where now it's critical. There's someone who did this crime. Not only do we have to solve it to give peace to that family and
Right.
close the case, but you got to prevent this guy from doing it again, right? You got to remove him from society. He's dangerous, and that's who you are.
It is, and I'll tell you that something that they don't really tell you in the brochure is they don't tell you that when you're getting recruited for a very back when I got on the police department, and some of your other guests that are homicide detectives back when they got on the department. Their respective departments, people wanted to do this job. I mean, and in today's day and age, I think it's, they have to twist people's arms to even or throw a bunch of money at them for signing bonuses to even get anybody to even be interested in this profession. Back then, there was plenty of people that were interested in doing this job. And I'm just talking about in general being a cop. Now, you take that in addition to that, you think that it's a real reasonable expectation for you to basically be able to make it to homicide. The reality of it is, and this is back in the day when I got on, and I'm sure it was similar to that for your other guests, is that back then, I mean, a lot of people wanted to do this job. There's a lot of prestige to it somewhat. I don't know that you can really go. I'm not saying I don't want to be discounting the other specialty units of any kind, because they all have their unique special parts about them, like child crisis or sex crimes or whatever the case may be. But this is just kind of one of those jobs that, it's kind of the pinnacle. And I back when I got on this, back when I became a homicide detective, and even when I applied and I didn't get it, there was like 9 and 10 people that were applying for it. Nowadays, you're lucky to get 1 or 2 people that are willing to sacrifice their entire life to do this job. I mean, most people just don't want to do this job anymore, because it really is somewhat of a lifestyle. And the generations have changed. People are just everybody's different than they were 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, easy.
So, that you take that into account as well. The police department, the police officers, everybody is different. Cops of today are far different than they were than when I got on the police department.
Well,
you take all that into account. But what I was getting at is that there was no guarantee that I was ever even going to make it to this position. And I sacrificed a tremendous amount from leaving the medical field, where I was making more money actually there. I was pretty well established. I had a couple of houses. One of them was a rent house. I had a couple of cars, and this is way back. And I came here to basically exchange all of that to live in a mobile home and make a lot less money, and then work nights and work the weekends, so there was a lot that I really wanted it that bad to where I was willing to give up my life to do this. So
yeah, I mean, you got to understand.
I'm sure your other guests feel the same way.
As a scrub tech, if surgeons like you, they'll shoot for the stars and make sure they have you and take care of you. Especially if you get a group, if you get a medical group that likes you, done. They're going to make sure you're well compensated. But you had a calling, right? And it's unfortunate. I say this a lot on the podcast. I feel like law enforcement, like teachers, they're underpaid for considering what it is. They walk in the fire. Let's be honest, and as of recent times, there's the issue with police and the negative spin on it. And people want to defund it. There's bad, like there were some cops, they did some bad stuff, period, but there's bad everything. There's bad teachers. There's bad chefs. I mean, you can't.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunately, what draws the attention is that people, and I'm being forward when I say this, when law enforcement takes a hit, yeah, there's a community that's upset by it, but there's a lot of opportunists that are criminal that will utilize social media, and they will make things viral to benefit them. Right? They see this opportunity. We can now weaken that area for our enterprises by utilizing social media to beat down law enforcement. So you don't very often see like mailmen or teachers or cooks that are going viral as bad people, because it's not in the interest of the masses to utilize that, right? They're not going
right.
to. Yeah, it's the opportunists, the criminal opportunists don't care about a bad cook somewhere. It's not going to help their business. And
I saw a statistic. I saw a statistic a few years back, and I encourage any of your listeners to try to find this statistic. And basically, it breaks it down, and you really have a 0.0000 something percent chance of being victimized by a police officer. I mean, you have more of a chance, and I know that I don't want to upset anybody, but it says in this thing that I watched this video, theoretically, you have more of a chance of almost being victimized by a priest or by somebody else entirely than you do by being victimized by a police officer. I mean, it is so remote. But yet you live in a world that social media has made it kind of the in vogue thing to show up at police departments with a gun or walk down the street with a rifle. Think about that for a quick moment. We're living in a world where you have mass shootings, and then you have individuals that go out there that want to walk down the street with a rifle in hand. And then when you, as a police officer, go up to them to see what in the heck they're doing, they're trying to get that YouTube moment, and they're trying to get you to do something that you're going to get sued.
Exactly.
And they're going to get paid. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
I called someone out. I called this guy. I saw this guy's video on YouTube, and I saw what he was doing. He was going to public place, like government facilities, utilizing his rights and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking, you're trying to provoke a problem. You're not. Listen, if you're having I say this a lot. If you're having a negative interaction with a police officer and you feel it's inappropriate, by all means, record it. You're supposed to protect yourself. But if you're going to police stations to quote unquote document, you're an asshole. You're provoking a problem. You're one of these people, like you said, they want this YouTube, we want the likes, and you're doing it in a way that's literally pushing people to the edge. I promise you, and I say this to a lot of people, if you have this problem with law enforcement in America, go to any other country, walk around with a gun, see the results. Go to any other country, form your own opinion, see the results. Yeah. You know what I mean?
No kidding. Yes, I do.
We're very spoiled here. You go to any other country and even question the authority, they'll X you out. And go to China and even consider having an opinion.
Good luck with that one. Yeah. And I'll tell you something. I've said this before to people, and I mean it with 100% sincerity. There has to be, I think that at some point in time, the world, or at least within this country, first of all, let me just say this. The vast majority of the citizens that live in this country are supportive of the police, period. I mean, by and large, the vast majority. It's just you don't get to see that. You get to see, the general public sees the YouTube spots or the things that people put on TikTok or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's just like anything else. People want to see negativity. They want to hear about who got into trouble, or they want to see something where somebody's doing something stupid. They don't want to see the good stuff. They don't want to see where a cop's doing something really good for somebody. Usually those aren't going to get the hits. It's the ones where the cop is doing something stupid, or they're getting caught up short, or like that craziness that happened in Memphis. That's an exception that happened in Memphis. Actually, I from what I understand, and I heard this, and I heard that. That's just a completely different scenario. You take any of these cop shootings that happen in this country where people go crazy over, and if you think about it for a moment, had the individuals that the police encountered in any of probably in about 98% of those situations where they had encountered this subject, had they just followed the commands of the police officer, we wouldn't even know their name. And I've always said this, is that the community, there needs to be some shared responsibility. It cannot completely fall upon the police department's shoulders, or whatever the law enforcement agency is. It cannot completely fall on the shoulders of the law enforcement individual for the responsibility. And that's kind of what's happened in a lot of these situations. Is it doesn't matter that you have these activists and you have this outrage, but nobody even cares about what the individual was doing to begin with. They just care about the fact that this cop ended up having to get to a point where he ended up shooting somebody, and they don't even want to hear about the rest. And that's unfortunate. It is that it's gotten to that point. I think it's going to change. I think the pendulum is actually going the other way a little bit.
I think it's going to significantly. I'll tell you why. In these areas where police officers are quote unquote being defunded, or they're being over, the cops now, to be a cop today, you're scrutinized for everything. If you say one word wrong, it's going to go viral on YouTube, right? And so they're backing off. And it's unfortunate because you know who's going to take advantage of that. It's the opportunists. It's the criminals. They're the ones, the criminal. I promise you, I did some research into this. Whenever you see these viral videos, they're the ones they're utilizing capital, illegal capital, to make sure those videos get very prominent. And they're the ones that are smiling because now they can just move into a community and they're going to do it unchecked. And then what's going to happen is, within the course of the next 5 years, communities are going to start seeing this. They're like, whoa, what's going on? The criminal aspect's getting crazy. And let me tell you something else too. And I want people to understand this. Whenever law enforcement or any kind of public figure in America do not so great, or they have a bad moment, it's not just here in America. We have enemies overseas that it's their job to make those videos viral. That's their existence, is to pollute and make a toxic environment, social media, to divide here in this country. We are so divided in America.
Yeah, we are.
It's
we
terrible.
Really are.
And you have these other countries that they're just smiling at this. They know full well.
It's a sad world we're living in today, as opposed to 10 years ago. Right. I mean, really, it's completely different.
And, you know, the same things that make social media a powerful outlet and probably could be a great one are the same things that turn into a toxic environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many good things about it, and then there's so much evil and a dark side to it as well. And that's just the stuff that the general citizen has access to. We're not talking about the dark web, right? Which I don't know a whole lot about it, but where you can buy a hitman or do a number of different things. You know what I mean?
There is treachery on the internet. I mean, treachery. Yes. It's I was being made reminded. What's this saying? Oh yeah, it was reminding me that there was a thing where, I don't know, I guess like a person was dressed up like as an animal and he was torturing people, and they were making videos, and people pay money to see this, and that scares the shit out of me. I mean, that frightens me.
Yeah, it's just a crazy world. So then that kind of brings me into I'll just kind of mention this too. So of course, we get asked, we're on the first 48. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I have.
I know I've heard one of your other guests, they said something, if you wanted to see how it really works, watch that show. And that's the truth. And we've been on that show it's coming up on 9 years. And, I often get asked, why in the world would the city of Tulsa, or any of the other cities for that matter, why in the heck would they want to have a show about murder about their city? And really the real reason is that, would you have any ideas as to why why in the world would they want to have a show about murder in their travel brochure?
Well, I'll tell you why. Two things. It attracts the special kind of people, but the other thing too is to bring it to center attention, right? Because if people are unaware of how these things are taking place, then the question of, well, why is there so much law enforcement? Well, now you know why. It's needed, right? I mean, there's no chance. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, that and really recruitment. It's actually the number one thing that because the city doesn't make any money, and neither do we. In reference to that show, I mean, you would think that the city might get something, but they don't get anything. And really, it's recruitment. It puts Tulsa on the map. It puts the other cities on the map. Mobile, Alabama. Most people would have probably never even considered, hey, working in a Mobile, that'd be a neat place, or whatever the city may be. So that's really the main reason. And since we've been on that show, it's kind of interesting because, we go to some of the worst parts of the city. I mean, not all the time and not every day, but we do go to those often when a murder happens. And when we show up to these places, that notoriously the individuals that live in a lot of those areas a lot of those people have been raised to really kind of hate the cops. And we've kind of seen the other side of it, to where, the number one viewing audience for that show is probably individuals in prison and people that live in those areas of the city that is plagued with that type of crime, because they want to watch and see what's going on. They want to see if they know somebody. They want to see what we're doing and how we do it. And when we show up to those communities that are literally the purple areas on a map in a city of crime, then it's kind of amazing the reaction that we get it's just how we get treated by the public in some of those areas. It's actually kind of refreshing especially in the day and age that we live in today, where a lot of people that we deal with, at least in some of the areas of town that we deal with frequently, we don't get treated like the normal police officer that shows up there. They're actually like, hey, thanks for, man, I love you guys. You guys you work so hard, because they appreciate the fact that we actually work just as hard for the victims, regardless of what their backgrounds are.
Right. And in those communities,
it means a lot to them.
They especially in those communities recognize the need for that buffer, that law enforcement, because at the end of the day, law enforcement is a buffer between people and the darkness that prevails around it. That's the truth. Again, I say this a lot. Law enforcement officers walk into fire. They don't know what they're going to encounter day to day. And like you said earlier,
every day is different. Every day is different. And you never know from one day to the other as to, you could be in a shooting today, so you never know. And it's really interesting. I'm one of those few cops. I'm not going to say the few cops. I'm one of those cops. And I think that you could ask your other guests or homicide guys, and they'd probably say the same thing that I'm saying here. But, I've been on the department for 24 and a half years, and I still like people. And you see a lot of guys that actually have been doing this job for 25 or 30 years, and you kind of see them and they just look ticked off, and they'll tell you straight up, man, I just hate this job. I hate people.
Yeah, they're petty.
I just never got there.
Yeah, it's a lot of those guys are in areas where they're just so underappreciated, and let's be honest, you're not making a fortune being a law enforcement officer. On top of which, when you're in a community where you're just underappreciated, right. It takes a toll. You have to have, again, back to the beginning, you have to have a certain constitution to do certain things, a calling. It's not cut and dry. Jason, pause 1 second. So anyway, we're talking about communities, most communities anyway. I'm going to use this word. Less fortunate communities need a buffer with law enforcement. Fact. They recognize the need for it. And what you were saying earlier about people carrying rifles around they want to show they have their rights and et cetera, et cetera. Well, today, like you were saying with these mass shootings, you don't know. You don't know. You don't know who's going to go out and just out of randomly just start. Especially, I saw a video where there was this guy fishing with I think it was an M16. And regardless if you're in a state where you have the rights to open carry or not open carry, come on, man. You're watching on the news what's happening. You know full well everyone's on high alert. It's scary now to walk in Walmart and you have to question if someone in Walmart's going to snap. You don't know. So, it's unfair to back law enforcement in his corner and say, look, I have my rights and you can't stop me and you can't say this. How do I know you're not going to just kill people because you feel like it?
You don't. And that's the thing. And I'll tell you something. It's one of those things that, personally, I'm against people being able to walk into a police station. And there's plenty of videos on YouTube that you can watch it. I ran across one of these First Amendment auditors. That's what they like. A lot of them will call themselves that. And I ran across one of those while I was at work, and I was up there with my partner, and I heard a bunch of loud screaming and yelling. And I went out there, and there's an old guy that he's probably 75 years old. He's a security guard, and he's basically having a confrontation with these two young guys. And that's what they're doing. Yeah. They're looking for, they're filming in areas that it's clearly states don't film. They're doing all this, and the security guard basically is just telling them, hey, you can't be back here. And that's when you've touched me, and now you've broke my camera, you've touched me, I want assault charges, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'd encountered these guys, and of course I'm getting recorded while this is all going on. They have the right to do that. And what they're doing is it's a no-win situation. You're not gonna win. They know exactly what to say. They know exactly. They're trying to push your buttons. And I finally asked the kid. I said, listen, what well, I need to see your ID. And he's like, well, what for? And I'm like, well, if you want to press charges here, it starts with that. I need to know who you are. Well, I don't know if I'm going to do that. I'm not going to feel comfortable with that. And we kept going through this and running around circles. I'm like, then we're done here. See ya. The bad part is that the old man that was 75 years old up there just trying to make a living at 75, he ended up losing his job over it, which made me sick to my stomach. But, that's what we're dealing with. And individuals walking down the street with a high-powered rifle, personally, I've got real issue with that. I don't think that's in the day and age that we live in today. And believe me, I'm all about guns. I'm all about people having their first or their Second Amendment rights. But I am not for people walking down the street without without the police having something to be able to do there. They darn sure should be able to find out who this person is, where they're going, where they're coming from, and that's, I mean, any cop that didn't do something about that would be negligent in their duties, as far as I'm concerned. Imagine, go back to Columbine or go back to any one of these major situations. We just had a mass shooting that happened here last year. I mean, I can't think of the last time we had a mass shooting in our city. And I'm not talking about gangster or one of those, like, a mass murder. I'm talking about like a going into a business and just killing people at will. And we live in such a desensitized environment now. I mean, you have individuals that walk into a bank with a mask on.
Yeah.
The guy might actually have, I mean, I know that it probably says something on the door, but I wouldn't be surprised if guys don't walk in there with a sidearm on a gun on their hip and wearing a mask, literally. And most people nowadays may not even give it a second look. So I don't know. I think there's some things like that need to be addressed. And I think that in the day and age that we live in, there's certain things that people need to be more responsible. And really the only ones that are exercising that and pressing and pushing the buttons are those that are looking for a lawsuit. That's really what's up. We're not talking about the guy that's unloading an AR from the trunk of his car to bring it into his house.
Yeah,
we're talking about guys walking in the center median with a rifle, just to get attention.
Here's the thing, Jason. Here's where, I mean, I hear this a lot, like, oh, it's our Second Amendment right and my guns. And listen, I own firearms. I have a concealed permit, and if I do carry in public, it's a 38 special because I need to protect me, right? Or maybe someone I care about close to me. You don't walk around with a fully automatic weapon or a high-powered rifle, because if you're doing that, obviously you live in the wrong place. It's time to move, right? It's insanity.
It is. And really, my wife's, and I've went to many places over the years and I haven't been carrying, and I carry more now just because I can't imagine being involved in a situation where I saw something like that go down and not being able to do something to try to prevent it.
I agree.
But,
I mean, that's a distinct difference. You know what I mean? Like, I have a friend of mine. I won't name him. I should. He owns all these high-powered rifles, and like he's always showing to people. I'm like, where do we live in Florida in a really kind of like above middle class community? Why the hell do you need these? He's like, well, they're, if you're an enthusiast and you want to go shooting at ranges, fine. But I fail to understand how you're going to be competitive or how you're going to do anything interesting with a fully automatic AK-47. If you need that weapon, you need to move from where you live, or you need to check your psychology at the door. Figure out why you're doing this, because it's insanity.
It is.
And a lot of these guys, Jason, I've been looking them up. Every time I hear about this new auditor person, and there's one up in the Boston area I was watching, and I look these people up and their education. At some point, you have to realize they're out there to make videos, get likes, and have acknowledgement, because they're going to the University of Google to know what to say to law enforcement. This isn't like they all became attorneys or they have an attorney background or they even worked in law enforcement themselves. They're going to Google to fact check what it is they can or cannot say and what it is they can or cannot get away with. And they're doing it in the name of likes and views. And that's tragedy. It's a tragedy.
And in some instances, I mean, some of those guys, they file a lawsuit and the city doesn't want to mess with it, so they just give them basically a little bit of money to get rid of them. And I say a little bit of money. I mean, who knows? It could be $5,000, it could be $10,000, it could be more. I don't really know, but I don't know. It's just it's one of those sad things that's going on now. To all those people I get asked, our clearance rate in reference to murders in our city. If we were to go back to 2016 to today, we've had roughly 500 or 501 murders in our city. And out of those 501, we've solved roughly 475. So that leaves about 25 murders that are unsolved since 2016. And that's a 95% clearance rate. And the reason why we are as successful as we are here in Tulsa, we're really lucky here. And the reason that we're as successful as we are is because people talk to us. And we have a decent relationship with the community here. if you were to take us and you were to import us as a unit, I get people that says, hey, I wish you could come here to Minneapolis. I wish you could come here to Baltimore. I wish you could come here to Chicago. And it wouldn't matter if you transplanted our whole unit there, if the demographics or the people that live in those communities, we're lucky here. We're kind of in the heartland. I think that most people here, even gangsters and even criminals alike, they don't want those bad guys that are out killing people on the streets any more than anybody else.
Agreed.
You stick us in New Orleans or one of those places, or like I said, Baltimore, nobody talks. It's just the way, it's a culture that nobody speaks to the cops. And if that's the case, you're not going to solve very many murders.
Well, because Jason,
that's how we solve them.
You know who's responsible to fix that? And it's not law enforcement. There are these community leaders, right? That the very people that are like, oh, defund the police and the rights here being, these are the responsible party. If you have that kind of clout to move that community by your verbiage, right? Then organize a meet and greet with police in the neighborhoods. That's the responsible parties. They have the power. The people trust them. I say this because I watched them on YouTube, on the news, where they're standing up as the leader of that community, and they're saying what law enforcement is doing here is not right, and our rights are being violated. If you feel this strongly about it, then if you want to be that mouth, if you want to be the figurehead, then responsibly organize a meet and greet with both law enforcement, members of the community, and lawmakers. Do that.
Absolutely.
That is your job. If you have that kind of reach, that's what you should be doing. Not because you're doing the right or wrong thing. You need to improve your community, because the answer is not to remove law enforcement. You remove law enforcement and the opportunists move in. And then that same person, I've watched this happen a year and a half ago. Same person who was crying about defund the police. Now they're on the news because their neighbors are being overran. And now they're blaming the police. Well, where are they at when the crimes are happening? You put them in this position. Let's be honest.
Well, it's a no-win situation. I mean, we're the most visible people in government, okay? And people want to hate on the government, and they're you wouldn't be able to pick half of your city council people if you're walking down the street. But cops were readily visible, and that's what people readily identify as the government, the man, the law. They're the ones that are keeping people down, that cost people money or whatever. I think that personally, I've always kind of thought, my dad said something to me a long time ago when I became a police officer, and I thought it was the best advice I'd ever heard. And I still live by it to this day. And I tell I get to teach a bunch. So I tell it to every academy class when I speak to them. And my dad told me, he goes, listen, make sure that your badge is the same size it was the day they issued it to you, not 5 sizes too big. Right. Basically meaning treat people right. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not advocating back rubs in the community. I'm just telling you that if you treat people right, generally you're going to get that reciprocated. And the other thing is that I think that we in law enforcement, one of the biggest mistakes that we make, and I think that one of the things that happens a lot of the time, is we just don't explain what in the heck we're doing. If you just explain to somebody what you're doing and why, when you get asked, I mean, as long as it's not like ridiculous and somebody's just trying to be confrontational. I'm talking about the general citizen. If there was a time when the cops used to just say, don't worry about what I'm doing. I'm telling you what's happening, and that was the way it was. Nowadays, if you just say, hey, listen, let me explain to you why I'm doing it, and this is why I'm doing it, most people get it. And they're like, oh, okay, all right, well, thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
And that alleviates a lot of problems.
I completely agree with that. I mean, that's community and law enforcement, having like a meet and greet. It's necessary.
Absolutely. Well, that's what it's about. I mean, I've been to block parties and stuff, and I can remember a time when I got ordered to go to a couple of block parties, and it was like 3 days after 9/11. And I told my boss, I said, yeah, I'm not the guy to go. I'm not going to those block parties. And he goes, oh yeah, you are. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I am not in the mood to go to anything. And so I ended up going to one of them, and basically they said, well, we've been, in light of the circumstances, we went ahead and canceled it. The other one, they were like, it was party on, and there was not even one mention about 9/11, which made me sick. But the point is that what I'm getting at is that getting together with the community, things like citizens police academies, and I don't know if you've ever done one of those, Adam, you'd probably love it. And I guarantee you they do it in the Tampa area. But I just taught at one, and it's where you get like 30 people from the community that sign up for this thing, and they get a real inside look as to what's going on. And you have people in there that are advocates, or I mean not advocates, but basically people that are protesters that sometimes sign up. You have people in the media that are in there. You have citizens that may have their head in the sand because they have no clue as to what's really going on up in the city. And in their minds, and one of them in particular, I'm thinking about it, was somebody that we had in this last class that, I don't think they had a clue as to how we operate or why we do the things that we do, or that kind of a thing. So it's really a good opportunity for you to get out there and advocate, and that's what we really should be doing in this profession. I'm kind of talking a lot. I'm sorry.
No. This is I'm listening. This is what I enjoy. I learn more
in this profession, and this is what I tell people. And this is one of the things, being on TV and such. It kind of, I get to speak throughout the country, and I really love that. And I tell people, because sometimes I've had people come up to me and they said, "Hey, we had so and so from this other show," and I won't mention any names, but they're like, "Yeah, that guy, he didn't really hardly speak. He wasn't very nice, et cetera, et cetera." And I tell people, I'm like, look. We are ambassadors to this profession. For the general casual citizen that lives in this country, that's not watching live PD or whatever the heck they call that show, they may watch the first 48, and that might be their only interaction with watching to see how cops operate and how we are in this country. The vast majority of people, maybe the other interaction might be them getting a traffic ticket or having a break-in at their house. So that gives them an idea that we're really kind of real people like everybody else. And like I said, I wish that more people were accessible, just like doing this program right here with you. I love doing this kind of stuff. And the reason why I do is because I think that people need to get to know who we really are.
Right.
And they need to hear more of the positives that we actually do, and just kind of, it takes all of us to make this a better place. And one of these days, I think that the vast majority of the public is going to have enough of just the stupid that exists in this world. The everybody's so sensitive now, or just the stupid, like the people we've talked about, the people that are just trying to provoke the police. And there was a time back in the day, and you probably remember this. I don't know how, you're probably close to my age. There was a time in our maybe not, but in our lives. Where people would freaking shame those people. And they wouldn't even come outside of their house if they acted as stupid as they do today. Well, and I just don't get how we ended up getting here. And like I said, that makes my job to try to get young people to sign up to do this particular job extremely challenging. And I think that what's going to happen is with this defunding things and everything like that, the public is going to realize that the individuals that are walking through the door to join police departments are of a lower caliber than we should be getting. And because they're having to settle, they're having to lower their standards to get people to fill seats. And it's really unfortunate. And I still can't for the life of me understand why, and I'll use Minneapolis as an example. I still can't understand why a city like Minneapolis would continue to put people in office. And I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. I'm not going down party lines here. But I don't understand. Well, I'm just talking about stupid. It's not about what they have a D or an R. I'm just talking about idiots that are running these cities that would possibly even think about trying to put a social worker or a person with no gun or these type of people out there to patrol your streets. It's absolute insanity. That might work in countries like we've talked about, China, where that might work in some places like that, where people do not get out of line, and if they do, there's serious consequences.
Well, yeah, because in China they'll disappear you. A billionaire. Yes. They did it to a billionaire. Their richest guy in China formed some negative opinions about their government, and he disappeared. And when he reemerged,
but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, when he reemerged, his whole attitude was adjusted. Oh yeah, the government's fine. He was pro-government after that. So,
yes, and I don't know. I just wish that the general public would really, and I really think that the most people in the general public, they get it, they understand it, they just don't want to speak up. And the reason why they don't want to speak up is because they don't want to get canceled, doxxed, whatever you want to call it. They don't want to be just decimated by these people because they don't agree with some sort of a narrative. And it's absolutely stupid. So, I don't know really what the answer is. If I knew what the answer was,
Well, it's
all I can tell you is that it's one person at a time. And I can tell you that the interactions that I have, as well as my colleagues, and we're all different. I tell people this all the time, that we're like, cops are like toys in a Cracker Jacks box. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, here's how it goes, Jason. I mean, for me, in my adolescence, I was a problem. I was a shady person. I hung out with the wrong people. That didn't change till I knew I was going to have a daughter, right? That's when I was like, all right, I'm in my 20s. I got to go to school. I got to do something for her.
Yeah.
And so later on, I changed my life because when I say I ran with a shady crowd, I was a shady person. Later on, I'm playing competitive pool on a league, and I run into a Pinellas County sheriff that used to harass, or at least I thought harassed me. And we got to speaking. He remembered me. I was like, yeah, why were you so hard on me? He goes, you know why? He goes, why? He goes, because you're this smart kid who, you seem like you were dancing on the border, and I put pressure on you to get you off the street. And when you hear that, you're like, wow. You don't realize how people view you, because you're in that era, in that age, and the way I was behaving, the cop was the enemy, right? We don't talk to them. Yeah. But you don't realize that this guy was literally, he put more pressure on me than any other, because even when he was detaining us and whatever, I spoke with respect, because I learned that from my parents. My mom's a Catholic. My father, is ex-military. I learned respect. You spoke to no matter what the scenario. So I think he recognized that, and he was trying to kind of separate me from the pack. And then later on, in my 30s, I'm talking to this guy, and that's exactly what it was. He's like, I saw you not being what these other guys were, and so I was on you constantly. And so for people, if he would have, or he's not the responsible party here, but if years ago I was in a room and he was there, let's say I'm arrested, and he's like, listen, man, I think this of you, I think that, you need to separate yourself from these people. It would have had a really profound effect on me. And that's where I think communities need to have meet and greets with law enforcement.
Agreed.
Because you don't know the perspective. We're basically on that guy's wearing a badge and I'm hanging out with these gangsters, and we can't, we can't be in the same room, et cetera, et cetera. That's ignorance. And you're not allowing yourself to evolve psychologically. You need to evolve. And how do you learn that?
There's two things that come to my mind when you're talking about that. Number one, when I was a school resource officer, the one thing that I had a cousin of mine that was basically, hey, there's something we can do for these kids. And I know that there's something that we can do. And of course, around Christmas time, you always see, there's presents, there's toy drives, all this, that, and the other. Pick a name. We're going to bring them this and that. And, for the most part, these kids of today, any of those toys, they're going to lose interest in it in about 5 minutes. And I always thought, what would be the gift that would be the best thing for these kids? And really, the gift that I always thought would be exceptional is becoming a mentor, showing up to the schools if you're successful, and just kind of almost kind of like the Big Brother, Big Sister program, but, just sitting down with these kids, maybe once a week for like an hour, go to their study hall if the school would ever allow it. Having a time where you could take a kid off, to an area, and you can just sit and talk to him, just ask him how things are going. Yep. What's your dreams? This is what's going on, because these kids of today, they don't get any kind of guidance. And I'm not saying all kids. I'm talking about just the general kids that end up growing up, where we end up having issues with them, where they don't really have any things like that. That's one of the reasons that I love Civil Air Patrol or the Explorer programs. And I was kind of like, I could have went either way when I was a kid. And basically, I finally got to the point where I was like, I'm going to, if you lay down with a dog with fleas, you're going to get them. And I kept hanging around with people that were going nowhere in life. And I just remember going, if you hang around with successful people, then you in turn will be successful. You won't be able to help it. That's just kind of how it works. To kind of go about, I wanted to mention one other thing that just kind of came to my mind that I thought about. And it's something that I tell people about every now and then. And that is, you probably remember, if you're old enough, back in the 80s, there was a docuseries. There was a documentary that was on HBO, and it was called America Undercover. And it was super, man. I mean, they would have shows about the police, about the mafia, whatever. And it was excellent. And it was on, like I said, it was on HBO. And there was one of them many years ago, and it was about the Memphis Police Department. And the moral of this story is basically how far we have came in policing. Okay. And so back then they had this thing about Memphis police, and it was all these cops that were just traumatized by what they had seen in their careers. and where they were all like in support groups and they were trying to talk. And you could tell these guys were probably doing some drinking on the side, probably lost a marriage, et cetera, et cetera. There's this one cop that he gets a call and he goes to this suicidal subject call, and it happened to be a 12-year-old little girl on her birthday that supposedly was suicidal.
Damn.
This cop, he ends up showing up at the house. I don't remember who he met. I mean, you would think he would have met the parent, right? But I don't remember that part of it. I just know that he ended up meeting with the child, and he goes, "Hey, I got called here, and they said that you were suicidal, et cetera, et cetera." And the girl, she's depressed, and she clearly was depressed, but she goes, "No, I'm all right." And then so he goes, "Okay," and he finally was satisfied with the point that she was all right. He ends up leaving the house, and about 5 or 6 minutes later, the dispatcher calls back and said that this girl now has a gun to her head. He immediately turns around. He goes back to this house. He shows up at the house, and then this little girl's sitting on the corner of the bed. And sure enough, she's got a gun to her head. And so he's like, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? Put the gun down. What's going on? Please stop." And she's like, "I'm sorry. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to change my mind." And then she ended up killing herself right there in front of that police officer.
Wow.
Now, that cop, he ends up turning around, and this is him telling the story, and I can see it happening. I mean, I know that stuff like this used to happen back in the day, and so nothing that I experienced personally, but I'm not. I mean, I've worked with cops that this stuff was going on. So basically, he calls homicide. This guy is. Can you imagine? I mean, watching this, it's a 12-year-old girl that does this in front of you. This cop is devastated. He is falling apart. Homicide shows up, and the other officers show up, and et cetera, et cetera. And then basically one of the homicide guys goes, "Okay, go ahead and do your supplemental report, and then go ahead and go 10-8, which basically 10-8 means go ahead and go back into service where you can take additional calls." Imagine that for a moment.
No way.
A lot of these people that we deal with, they don't, and I'm not saying it's to this extreme, trust me, but a lot of these people that are out there, they don't realize the kind of calls that we may have came from before we've ended up at their house. Now, I'm not making excuses for the guys that are just basically a jerk, because they exist too, trust me.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking about people having that understanding that this guy might have just came from a traffic fatality where a kid was killed. I mean, things happen. And that doesn't happen every day. But the point to the story is that that's where we were in our environment in policing back in the 80s, maybe even into the 90s. Into the 90s, there was some of that stuff going on. Nowadays, that cop would be sent home. They're not in trouble. It's just they're sent home to decompress.
Yeah.
To basically, okay, let me wrap my head around this, because we want these cops to be healthy for 30 years. We don't want them to in turn be sucking on a gun when they're home alone because their wife's. You know what I mean? It's the healthiness of on our end as well. And I think that's why you get a lot of cops that they kind of gravitate towards cops. I don't really, and I'll even admit to you, Adam, I don't have a ton of friends that are not cops. I just don't know a lot of people outside of work, and other than relatives, et cetera. But and maybe that's a side consequence to what I've been doing for years. I don't dislike people. I just don't have a lot of friends that aren't cops.
Well, yeah,
So,
I mean, not to mention you have years of service. It's hard for you to have a dialogue with someone who doesn't understand you.
I mean, to an extent. I mean, the bonus about my job and really kind of the fun part about my job, it's fun. I guess you could call it fun, but basically, kind of the interesting part about my job is probably a better word for it, is the fact that I like to tell stories, and there's a lot of stuff that every one of these things that you go out on that's got the unique craziness that goes on with it. It's sometimes, it generally makes for a pretty interesting story. And most people, by and large, are kind of fascinated by that. They can't believe that exists. They're just like, "Oh my gosh, that really happens." And yeah, it really does happen. And this is why. And I'll tell you right now, Adam, one of the things that is kind of fascinating about homicide, I know when you've had, is it Clyde?
Cloyd Steiger. Yeah.
Cloyd, interesting guy. I've never met him. I'm linked in with him on LinkedIn, and I've never spoke to him in person, but I mean, Cloyd talks about how the types of murders that they had up there in Seattle, they're super bizarre. I mean,
yeah.
the
to say the least.
The vast majority of our murders are basically revolving around the common denominator of just straight stupid. I mean, you'll have a gangster that kills another gangster because they stepped on his J's. I mean, things like that you're just sitting there scratching your head about, going, "This is so over the top stupid. I just can't believe it." the types of murders that I think that he dealt with a lot. I mean, serial killers up there, they seem to hang out up in that area a lot more than they do here.
I'll tell you one thing. A story he was telling me with one of his former partners on a previous episode was about the serial killer they had. And the guy was just like, hey, boys, what's going on? Like, relax, because he's caught. He knows. And
sure.
They bring up the name of one of his victims that got away. And he went from this talking guy to like, yeah, I remember her. Like, his whole demeanor changed. That freaked me out. Like, his personality split dead in half. To hear that freaked me out.
Oh my gosh, yes. I would love to, to be able to talk to one of those guys that if you were able to build the rapport with him. There was a guy, and I can't remember what state this guy was in, but he was a serial killer, and he just wouldn't talk to anybody but this one guy, and how interesting that would be to be that one guy that for whatever reason you built the rapport with this guy where he's basically going to unlock the secrets to all these murders. I mean, how interesting that would be.
Did you listen to the episode I did with Norm Pardo about O.J. Simpson?
No, I didn't, but I'll definitely look for it because that's a case that's fascinating.
I got to tell you, I'm not going to blow it for you. When you listen to that episode, I have to have Norm on again because I did some more research and got to tell you, found a lot of stuff that I was really concerned about. There's some moving parts. Listen, it involves a serial killer. It involves somebody who had it in for OJ. The whole thing
really
is scary. So when you
mean like I think I want to hear this because I've seen some guy that keeps sending me messages and it's basically about how OJ Simpson's son may have been involved with him.
I thought that too. I looked into that. No, there's no look. The problem with OJ's son is he's got a hair trigger. I don't think he would have got away with it. What I can tell you is when I did the research on the damage to Ron Goldman, this guy, now this is a 6-foot+ martial artist. This isn't like some regular dude. He's a big athletic dude with martial arts. His defensive wounds showed whoever he killed him, they fought a battle, right? There was a war at hand. So it wasn't like this guy walked up, killed him, got away with it. Someone got beat up a bit. OJ had a cut on his finger. That's it. And so, in a nutshell, I think OJ and this other person goes to confront Nicole about the drug issue, et cetera, et cetera. And what ends up happening is Ron shows up to bring this girl I think it was her glasses, which was like, in the middle of the night. That's an excuse to see a chick. And
no, for sure. Yeah.
And so OJ's got this other guy with him, and him and Ron getting this confrontation. OJ's like, I'm not dealing with this. He leaves, and this other guy does the deed. And the guilt you see on OJ's face is because if I didn't go there, this would not have happened. That's his guilt. He knows he's responsible for it happening. However, I don't think he committed the act himself. I don't think OJ has a constitution to kill someone. But the other guy, when you listen to that episode and you find out who that other guy is,
I'm definitely going to listen to it. I'm going to tell you this, that Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Helter Skelter, one time he called me at home, and this was before I was a cop, and I actually got to talk to him for like 20 minutes. And one of the other books that he wrote was a book about the O.J. Simpson case, and it's called Outraged. And he went on. I wanted to talk about Helter Skelter. He wanted to talk about the O.J. Simpson case. But, he just kept going on and on and on. I'll tell you what it is not. It's not a crazy conspiracy with the LAPD to frame him. I never felt that.
Right.
But it is a crazy case. It really is.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I think the LAPD, in a nutshell, what ended up happening is they dropped the ball. Like if they would have looked into this other guy and found out who he actually was, I promise you, So in a long story short, this guy that's involved goes on to kill a lot of people. In fact, he was around OJ in that era under an assumed name. It wasn't even his name. He was there under a whole other name. Yeah, so let's do this. We're going to close out because I'm going to have you back on. We're going to talk in post. So for those of you that are listening, we're going to say good day, good evening, good night, and I'm going to talk to Jason in post.
Hey, thanks a lot, Adam, for having me on, and hopefully your listeners got a little bit out of it. And I would love to, have that opportunity again down the line. Thank you.
Indeed. We're going to say goodnight, everyone, and Jason, I'm going to talk to you in a second.
Yeah.